Good evening. We're going to get started right on time because of the drought conditions that are happening right outside. Welcome to the Longmont Urban Renewal Authority Board meeting for May 5th, 2026. Time is 5:30. Couple notes. Actually, we'll call the meeting to order. Can we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Parker.
Commissioner Parker's chewing.
Commissioner McGilvray.
Chair Popkin.
Commissioner Hidalgo Ferring.
Commissioner Cal Crawford.
Commissioner Chris.
Commissioner Jim Burful. Commissioner McCoy.
Commissioner Loachman.
Thank you, and staff.
Katie Faltus, Revitalization and Redevelopment Manager.
Sandy Cedar, Assistant City Manager.
Jen Newton, the Executive Director of the Urban Renewal Authority.
Harold Dominguez, City Manager. Eugene May, General Counsel.
Teresa Lloyd, Chief Financial Officer. Jeff Good-Apperson, Chief Development Services.
Molly O'Donnell, Housing Director.
Wonderful. Welcome. Noting that Commissioner Marching and Commissioner Prieto are not present. We have 9. We have plenty of quorum. Fantastic. We do have, we'll move on to the next part of our agenda, public invited to be heard. Are there any members of the public who wish to make any comments? Just here to listen? Fantastic. Welcome. We will move to item number 4, approval of the minutes. We have the March 31st, 2026 Laura minutes. Are there any questions or discussion on the minutes? Yes. Executive Director.
If I may,
Yes.
both Katie and I listened to the recording several times, and it seemed like there was a, where it's highlighted in yellow on your minutes, that I believe that it was the vice chair who made the motion and maybe Commissioner Parker who seconded it, but you said no go for it twice, and we listened to it and we both really tried, and so
I'm good.
we're not certain, and so we wanted to flag it for thoughts, and maybe if somebody recalls whether or not that motion was made by Commissioner.
Thank you very much for flagging that. Let me pull up that section.
I think
It's a 2 minutes and 35 seconds.
Yeah, it's just 2 minutes and 35 seconds if you're interested in where it
Just
is.
calling the meeting to order?
No, it was like where the, it's the minutes related to,
Yeah, the second.
the second set of minutes.
Oh, I see. From the previous minutes there.
From the previous minutes.
But I can't remember. But I.
Oh.
And so we have it as Commissioner Parker, I just
From
wanted.
December?
Yeah, from December, so it's
Oh.
like the, but it was, those were made at the last.
Oh, it was when we approved this in the
We
last
approved it
report.
in March.
Yep.
Anyway, we thought we would flag it here.
I remember who it wasn't. And you did second a couple things right back to back there, so. Yes, I know it was 2 different people who made the motions. I have no objection to Commissioner Parker. Thank you for flagging that. Does anyone else remember differently?
I don't.
No, that's not
Okay.
I don't remember.
Thank you, Commissioner McCoy, for trying to mind meld and try to. All right, we'll go ahead and treat that as Commissioner Parker. Thank you for flagging, Jeff. Other discussion or comments or questions on the minutes?
Move we approve.
I have a motion to approve the minutes from Commissioner McCoy.
Second.
And a second from Commissioner Berthold. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We will then move on. Welcome. We have Commissioner Prieto has entered the room and joined the conversation. We will then move on to our report from the Executive Director. Jen, anything you want to share?
Will you go to this slide? So the only thing that I have is just an update about the First and Main Transit Center Urban Renewal Plan area. So at your last meeting, we had the presentation related to it, and we went through the light study and had the presentation from Andy Arnold, who's our consultant, who's helping us through this process. We have subsequently sent the plan, the impact report was prepared and sent to the county. So we didn't send the plan, we were waiting to have the plan include the legal descriptions. We will send that to the county, but we did start the 120-day negotiating period and have also reached out to the other taxing districts as well. So it's a very brief update, but that's the one I have.
Thank you very much. And just for the public and the record, can you just introduce the staffing change that you informed us all via email?
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. So Laura Moody, her last day was with the city last month sometime, and so I am stepping in as the director for urban renewal. So I think there'll be continuity, and that's the plan moving forward. We haven't yet figured out exactly how we'll rehire that position. But for now, I will be here as the executive director, but working obviously with Katie Faltis to do all of the work and to present all the information to you at your meetings.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate you stepping up there. Great. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we move on to regular business. One, on time, you should have all seen that the meetings have been updated to reflect what is our intention now of going from 5:30 to no later than 8. We know last time was much longer, and we're going to do our best to try to keep it within that, including not necessarily always ending at 8, but maybe sooner. There might be a couple times where we have, as we did last time, either multiple conversations that are deep or multiple kind of near-term approvals that have to happen. So just flagging that is the intention going forward, to stick to no later than 8. We'll try to give you a heads up if possible, if we know that the packet / agenda items are going to push the time boundaries for that as best as possible. For now, I hope you enjoyed the shorter packet for tonight's meeting. Good. We'll move on to regular business. Our item 6A is a letter of support for the Front Range passenger rail. Brief context here being that a lot of the near-term conversations, including what we started at our last meeting, is on the First and Main urban renewal area, which is directly related to the First and Main transit station and the resulting economic redevelopment strategies around that. So we have a draft letter for this board to consider in broad support of the Front Range passenger rail plans. I'll turn to Commissioner Hidalgo-Ferrin and maybe City Manager Rafa Dominguez in a moment, but just noting that at the end of April, RTD and a bunch of the other partners in the kind of Front Range passenger rail planning area or effort did approve a $330 million 25-year term sheet with Burlington Northern and Santa Fe, BNSF, the railroad that owns the freight rail that we are planning to share. And operating costs are estimated to be about $30 million annually, shared by the state and RTD. After that, $16.4 million has been contributed already from RTD to the city of Longmont for the First and Main transit station. So there's investment that's happening in multiple regards, directly to Longmont and in the surrounding region. So just wanted to acknowledge kind of where things are more broadly on that and what our role is. Commissioner Hidalgo-Ferrin, anything you want to share from some of your regional escapades, and same with City Manager Dominguez?
Well, I mean, you mentioned what I was going to mention, but yeah, I mean, documents are being signed, it's coming, and I believe, what was it, January or June now, 2029.
January
2029. Somebody had said June in one of our meetings, but that might be an error. So January 2029, it's the first phase of, yeah, for Longmont to Denver, and then moving in Fort Collins with another funding mechanism, though. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's a state, so
That was a state.
it's a state funding, so it's a combination of a lot of separate organizations within CDOT in terms of the funding mechanism. So essentially what's going to happen is RTD will put the funding in from Denver to Longmont, and then the state's putting in the funding from Longmont to Fort Collins as terms of part of the bigger project.
Yeah.
3 round trips a day.
Yep.
As part of the service. We've been meeting locally with the FRPR group, really it's a combination of FRPR, CDOT, in terms of how we're developing the station, the platform placement. And so it's really being integrated into the broader First and Main conversation in terms of what we're doing with the transit station, but also how the Front Range Community College project is fitting in with this. So a lot of design work is moving forward right now. That is then also connecting into the quiet zone work that we're doing. So all of these pieces are now starting to come together in the project. I can answer any specific questions you all have, but we'll probably talk for an hour.
Yeah.
Could probably talk for about 5 hours on the subject. I just wanted to, because there are some members who have been part of city council and county decisions and other regional things, I wanted to make sure that enough context was brought for everyone in the group. Questions and discussion. Commissioner Calkin.
Thank you, Chair. So we have a bunch of other letters of support. So Front Range Community College provided a letter of support. LDDA, Visit Longmont, Northern Area Transportation Alliance, also known as NADA, also put in letters of support for Front Range Passenger Rail.
Thank you. Commissioner Lichman?
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple questions and appreciate the context for this Laura conversation. Who is the whom it may concern?
Yeah.
I had a question in the second paragraph, second sentence, the language in there that says the Front Range Passenger Rail District's operating plan is vetted and takes a pragmatic approach. By signing this letter as Laura, is that saying that we have vetted that and we agree that it's a pragmatic approach? And then the other, I was just trying to figure out what the purpose is, and is there any, for folks who have been at that table, is there any potential consideration of a letter from Laura that feels very open being used later in 2026 for, I don't know, maybe a ballot measure or some other interpretation of what the support means? Those are the questions that I had.
Again, great questions. In terms of future use, I would refer to when this is signed and dated in terms of what it's speaking towards directly. If there were other political purposes it could be used for, I'd say that Laura would then consider using it for, Laura would consider an updated letter at that time for more specific purposes. I think this is more kind of generating the broader community of support for the current plan that's different. In terms of who this would be going to, that's a great question, and one I was going to ask as well, both to the group and to staff. Jen, do you want to speak a little bit to your thoughts on that?
I think this letter closely, very, very closely mirrors what the city signed, the mayor signed on behalf of the city, and it was routed through Commuting Solutions and shared, I think, in advance sort of some of these conversations, including the vote that happened at RTD related to joint service. I think we could have this be to Sal Pace, who's the director of the district, and certainly the language here is open for any changes that you'd like to see happen here. We just said that we would provide a starting place for this conversation at the last meeting. So,
is there particular urgency to vote on the language tonight in terms of other meetings or where this letter might be going in the near future?
There isn't. I think some of the communities that are along that have stops, including Longmont, so the city council would see something on the May 12th agenda. So city council will hear the presentation related to Front Range Passenger Rail and joint service. A brief piece of that is joint service. And there also will be a resolution that is brought forward related to support for Front Range Passenger Rail and also for station summary. So acceptance of what the station summary would look like for the city. So those things are going to all of the various communities that are along the corridor and that have stations. So that's the active work that's happening now. They have not yet announced whether they would, Front Range Passenger Rail would put something on a ballot. So this is something that could hold until there's a ballot question. If you wanted to wait that long, we're asked to bring something. So this is that one.
I appreciate that. I think the question is, if the intent for this letter is around somebody's campaign for ballot measure, then that's an additional conversation.
I would agree.
Is that the intent of the lower board signing this letter? So that's, I just wanna have clarification. If it's just a general letter saying we think Front Range Passenger Rail District is a good idea, I would suggest that we put in there some language around if a ballot measure is the intent, the lower board would take it back or help us. But once we put a letter out there, it could be used for anybody or anything if it's as broad as this is. So just a couple noticings on this.
And that's very well said. I would not feel comfortable having this be used for any kind of other political campaign effort at this time. I would want the board to have a separate conversation on that. So this would be more broadly. I would love to see future language, and maybe we don't vote to approve this tonight, and we can all sleep on this. I would love to see a little bit more language specific to like the redevelopment goals that this board is really tasked with supporting, and reinvestment in kind of our downtown community and the Front Range campus relocation, to make this a little bit more specific to the economic revitalization of the downtown. I think that actually would strengthen the letter and the reason why we're supporting this, because it's really a transportation, and the transportation connectivity is actually going to be a very direct complement, hopefully, to the economic reinvestment strategy that this board is working on. So I'd love to see that intersection made a little bit more clear, and happy to workshop language with staff on that, if that would be helpful.
So when we signed our letters, the mayors signed, it was a letter to RTD over a specific vote that they were gonna be having with the joint service and, the BNSF, oh God, what is that, term sheet. So, so it was, there was directly who the addressee is. So we had people specific that we were targeting, and the ask was very specific, was to move these certain items, to approve these certain items that would pave the way for Front Range Passenger Rail. So, so if we had something specific, I think just having it like who is it going to, kind of sending it out there, I don't think that, I like, is it going to state, is it going to RTD, so that piece, so I'm just wondering, it's a little too general. I'm wondering if we wait until after the presentation on the 12th, that might be helpful as far as talking points that we want to make sure we include, and as far as Laura's concerned, that we are mentioning, how it will benefit, our roles and responsibilities as Laura in providing those, those opportunities.
Other comments? Yeah, Commissioner Christ.
So along the same lines that everyone is sharing, I think one of the things we agree on is that we need reliable, affordable transportation, especially transportation that gets used. It's also important for us to construct connections to all the transportation that's available to people. But we were at at least 4 of us were at the Community Solutions when the governor came and talked to us and said, this isn't what we voted for, isn't exactly what we want, but it's what we can do now. And it's a little bit of a problem for the voters who at that time were $103 million in, now I think that's in October. And also, Longmont has a reputation of being innovative, of doing things well, of having great infrastructure, and so I'm a little concerned that we keep the language to something that Longmont can follow through on.
Stand behind.
Stand behind, deliver on. Not necessarily pin our star to RTD in any way, because things always seem to change with them, and I think ultimately for the voters, this will be somewhat of an emotional decision, and they need to do their due diligence to find out whether they think it's a good use of their taxpayer money. And we need to focus on what we're doing to build the infrastructure to make transportation, more available, which is what Longmont is very good at and can deliver on.
Seeing no immediate other comments and hearing the discussion so far, I might entertain a motion to table this to our next Laura meeting.
So moved.
I have a motion to table until our next Laura meeting, which should be in July. And I have a second from Commissioner McCoy. So that was a motion from Commissioner Christ and a second from Commissioner McCoy, just making that clear for the record. Is there any discussion on that motion? Yes, Commissioner Lichman.
Just that when it comes back, it would be helpful to have an understanding of what the purpose of the letter is. I think that would help all of us if we are going to do any kind of language edits.
Great. And I would also say maybe a little bit of a background sheet on where things are in terms of kind of just whatever the city is perhaps working on in general too, or whatever is even put out by RTD or FRPR to help us and the public understand where this is coming from. Great. Thank you, Commissioner Lichman. Any other questions or discussion on the motion?
Would it help maybe coming forward as a resolution? Because it's just like from the board, and so it's just out there rather than having, because it doesn't sound like we're going to specifically send it to any particular body.
I appreciate that. Why don't I talk with staff about that
So
as we table this, presuming we table this exact letter, why don't we talk about what the most effective medium would be? Thank you.
Yeah, keep that
good point,
open.
yeah. Great, so we have a motion to table to our July Lura meeting and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion to table passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We will move on to our next item on regular business, 6B, that is consideration of an intergovernmental agreement with the St. Vrain Valley School District. I will also note that as you were hopefully saw your email in the last 24 hours on the brief edit from staff. Staff, do you want to voice that over just for everyone's awareness?
Sure. So, actually, maybe I'll just go through it and then we can come back to that. So this is an intergovernmental agreement with St. Vrain Valley School District. This is for the Twin Peaks Mall Urban Renewal Plan Increment Financing Area Number 2. We can move to the next slide. So this intergovernmental agreement was approved by the St. Vrain Valley School Board on April 8th. And this resolution, if it's approved tonight, would approve Laura's participation in the agreement, which would pledge incremental revenue from the St. Vrain Valley School District property tax for 25 years in this urban renewal area. And actually, why don't you go back one slide and I'll just go ahead and say, so essentially I transposed the amount, like the mills that would be retained by the Urban Renewal Authority and which would be remitted to the school district. So the IGA would allow the Urban Renewal Authority to keep only a portion of the mill levies for the school district. And the remitted school district increment would mean the portion of the school district increment created by all of the mill levies imposed by the school district, except the mill levies by the school district that fund the school's district share of its local total program, and that must be remitted to the school district. So I'll come back to what that means here in a second if we go to that next slide. So this area, as we've talked about a lot, is related to this project that is happening on the former Walmart site. Within Envision Longmont, which is the comprehensive plan, it's an area of change for the city, that, this land is being redeveloped to meet the needs of Longmont's residents and businesses and people who work in Longmont. So there's a tie to the comprehensive plan for the actual project, which is not what's being considered, but I thought it was relevant to talk about what is in the project. So here's that site. It's at Nelson and Hoover. There have been site challenges there in terms of access, so it hasn't been a site that has been desirable for other development. There were challenges in the way that the property was in multiple ownerships and challenging as it's adjacent to other property owners that weren't willing to cooperate, and there's, as I mentioned, limited access off of Nelson Road. So the redevelopment, that the increment that is generated from the project that would go there would be reinvested into the project to eliminate these elements of it's on the transportation corridor, so it's, the location of the project is intended to be a place where people can use transportation, so we were just talking about that, the need for, affordable and reliable transportation. So this is located on that transportation corridor. So the development project itself is 256 units, and it has an integrated parking garage, and it's noted here that the community benefit is that elimination of public safety issues on that formerly the demolished Walmart site, which has been kind of an attractive nuisance, and we've had a lot of calls for service in that area. So the consideration of the intergovernmental agreement is, it actually says with the city of Longmont, it should say with St. Francis Valley School District. So the resolution is 2026-04. So the IGA would allow the Urban Renewal Authority to retain only the property tax mills that are backfilled by the state. So the mill levy override, bond redemption mills, and future school election revenue would not be part of the amount that would be retained. So in the staff report, I misstated which part is retained by the Urban Renewal Authority, and I apologize for that. The IGA also includes an overall cap for the amount of property tax from the school district of just over $15 million. So this agreement for the IGA is for both the properties where the project that I just described is being built, and also the parcel that is on the other side of Hobby Lobby to the east. So there are two parcels that are part of this area, so the IGA would cover both of those areas as part of tax increment finance number 2. So that's all I had. I'm certainly open to any questions that you have. The IGA was attached in the packet and does have the correct language, just for clarity.
Thank you very much, Jen. Questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Lutchman.
Thank you. Would you mind going back to the transit slide, just to understand, thank you, and I don't know if someone has a mouse that works on the screen, but just trying to fit on here where this project is, because it's right Nelson Ho, correct?
It's my own house.
So Nelson and Hobart
It'll be by the blue one. It'll be the blue
it's where the yellow and blue connect.
Okay.
No.
Oh, yeah, blue?
On Hobart.
We're all come.
Yeah.
Now I'm
Go again.
Yeah, right there we go.
Yeah, it's that stop there.
Okay, well, and I was just curious on, RTD is doing some route changes right now and requesting input from community members in June. And so I was just curious if this route might be impacted, do we know?
This is the BRT route that's pretty
New.
well set in terms of bus rapid transit route that's gonna go through that location.
That will
But it's
start
not happening right now.
That will start in 2028.
It starts in 28, yeah.
Yeah, these are not existing lines. These will be new lines that will be created for that, so the route changes, which is a good question, won't mess up any of the current plans.
So this slide is contingent on something else happening. I just wanna make sure, because I was on the bus today and this is not there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
So
this isn't that, yeah.
and that's super helpful for me to just remember that we haven't all been as steeped in the RTD stuff as I have been lately. So essentially, part of the reason why we're building the first and main transit center over here is to accommodate the BRT. In fact, probably the main reason that we're doing it, and so this is part of that. So the RTD BRT project is a regional project, and they're waiting for us at the end of the line to finish the transit center. And so this will roll out in January of 2028. And that's part of the urgency that we have in building the first and main transit center. So it's not contingent on this project happening. However, this project would benefit from the advancement of that BRT that RTD is doing.
The bus rapid transit is not contingent on
It's
this
not
project
contingent
that
on-
Lura is considering on our IGA. It's not considered on the
It's-
Walmart property. It's related to the first and main
Right.
project more broadly.
Right, I understand that piece, but this slide, those routes are not there right now. So this slide about transportation benefits to this particular item that Allure is discussing is contingent on a different project.
So maybe I can answer it a different way. The Hines project that you approved the agreement for at your last urban renewal meeting, that project is not contingent on the BRT happening, but it would benefit. And it has not yet started to go vertical. They haven't finalized all of their building permits. So it will take them a few years to build the project. And so the BRT, when it comes online, would be, and when this, when the Hines project comes online, it would be essentially maybe the same time. So when it opens, BRT would also be available, or close. They would be close.
Yeah, and just for the folks who can't maybe see all of the different hubs there, the northern terminus of this would be at the just north of 66 and 287 for both the orange and the blue routes, going through Longmont with a few stops, and the southern termini here would be the downtown Boulder transit station mobility hub, and then CU's campus. So just flagging the direction that all of these ultimately get to. Yeah, Commissioner McGilvray, Vice Chair McGilvray.
Yeah, thank you for referring to that as Vice Chair.
Of course, sir.
So I have a question for Commissioner Bertha, because you recently had the school board approve this in April. So were there any concerns from the board, from the district?
No,
Okay.
no, really clean presentation. It was right there. Went through, everybody voted yes.
Thank you both. Other questions or discussion on this resolution regarding the tax increment financing revenue agreement with the St. Vrain Valley School District?
I have a point of clarification, I guess. You mentioned that it's capped at $15,100,000. Has that changed, or is it just a coincidence we had capped the project at $15 million?
It was the amount that we had shared with St. Vrain for the amount of the mills that we would be able to use for this, plus a certain percentage, assuming that property tax increases at a greater rate than we were modeling it to. So they wanted to cap it so that it wasn't escalation forever in terms of how much would be diverted from the school district. So it is coincidental that they are similar
It's
numbers.
a different amount, it just happens to be in line with.
Great question. Commissioner Pritchett?
Yeah, it's kind of like just something that I thought about in our last conversation at the LHA board. What does the relationship look like with St. Vrain Valley in providing bus transportation to kiddos? Because I'm just kind of like thinking about this property, and it's surrounded by like major roadways, and so like, should we get a family in there? I doubt that we will. Maybe, I don't know. Families usually look for parks and green space and walkable areas, but should we get a family in there? Like, do we work with the St. Vrain Valley School District to make sure that we are getting transportation to this location, regardless of the 2-mile radius requirements that they have? I'm just thinking about that ahead of time.
So that is something that we can certainly inquire about. I don't know exactly how they do their
There
routes
is a
or
process,
buses.
yes.
But there is a process.
It's a process.
They would add the route.
Yeah.
So it does, yes.
Yeah,
So
'cause it
that
doesn't
triggers
look like-
every time there's
Yeah.
a development.
Any development.
It triggers, yep.
So even if it's within the mile radius,
I don't think there's a school
Based-
nearby
Based on
that
the location of those buildings,
there.
there may be no way to safely walk children to any of the schools
Mhm.
where the radius is 1.5 for elementary or 2 for middle and high school. That
Yeah.
we also consider whether or not there's a safe travel route for children. Do they are there sidewalks? Are there too many crossings involved in it? So yeah, that's where we've always done the process on determining whether a route's going to go there or not.
okay, thank you.
I do want to clarify just a couple things here. One, as we think about who might be, who we're building things for, like we should be recognizing that different people and situations look for different types of units, and for different sizes of families and people who are in different households. And then secondly, just on the walkability, there is actually an underpass to a trail going west,
That's
right,
true.
right next to the project there, and then just north of the fairgrounds, which connect directly into our
That's the
greenway
whole,
system.
the whole greenway
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
So it's actually quite well connected to pedestrian infrastructure, even though there are big roads nearby.
But not
Right.
schools.
Yeah, I wouldn't want my kids
Sure.
walking down
Yeah.
there.
Sure.
Stay out of the tunnels. Stay out of the tunnels.
Great, Vice Chairman
Stay away
Gilbert.
from the-
Yes, I would like to make a motion. I would like to make a motion to approve our IG agreement with the St. Vrain Valley School District, Resolution Laura 2026-04.
Thank you. We have a motion from Vice Chair McGilvray to approve the resolution. A second from Commissioner Kalkoffer. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously as well. Wonderful, thank you. With that, we will move to, I believe that's all of regular business, correct?
It is, so we have,
Yes.
something to finish up from last time?
So the remainder of tonight actually is on two subjects that I think will be of interest to the group. One is a continuation of our later night housing conversation in our previous meeting, to pick that up where we left off and address some specific questions we've received since. And then we will move on to a staff presentation on the mixed use innovation and revitalization zone district from the city's planning department, who will be presenting on that. One note before we jump into the housing conversation, we're going to handle this in a couple ways tonight, and there will be times for open discussion. But we're going to start with some of the questions we've received via email to kind of get things going. This will work in a few different ways from an efficiency and hopefully efficacy standpoint of the conversation. One, I just want to note that the city is working on a housing assessment, and Molly can add more details on how this will work. There's an active process going on to kind of take a stock of where the city's housing needs are. I believe, Molly, correct me if I'm wrong, that we should have initial results come June, July, and that we were talking, Jen, Molly, and I were talking about bringing a follow-up conversation to this probably in September, at the September LURA meeting, when we have more data from a kind of more complete picture of the updated state of our housing needs for early fall, for this group's awareness as well, given some of the interests and questions we've received in the past. Molly, anything you want to clarify on that?
That's it. We do have an existing housing needs assessment from 2023, which uses data anywhere from 2021 to 2023, but we're doing a refresh because A, we need to, and B, there's new data that we'd like to go out there and dig up. So.
Great. Thank you, Molly. So we're going to start with a couple clarifications in the topic area based on questions we've received. Then we'll move to a little bit more substantive breakdown on some of the topics based on what we started last time and the questions we've received as well. So, Molly, I will pass it over to you and Jen to dig in.
Sure. So I have a list of questions from Commissioner Loachman, and so I think that we might address those directly, and then how would you like to do this? Open up for other questions after that?
Yes.
Okay, so a first question is related to who are the do you mind if I just read the questions, or would you like to paraphrase? Who are the partners that could be working with Longmont residents on financial literacy and planning while these projects are in the works? So I would invite the whole group to listen. Every year in the end of March, we present to City Council our annual report of housing accomplishments. And this year, that was on the March 24th meeting. If you're ever interested in doing a deep dive, you can listen into that video. But on the city side, we do have robust housing programming. We do provide funding to support staff for the Boulder County personal finance program, which does do things like prepare people for home ownership. It also could be working with renters to just get better stability financially to stay where they are. But it really works with people in a wide range of areas, but home ownership preparation is one of the major ones. So we do provide funding to them, and last year they served 211 households with personal finance coaching sessions. So we do have some robust programs on that side, of which we report to City Council regularly on our accomplishments there.
Do we track the data from those 200 and so participants into, did they transition into home ownership?
Not specifically. The personal finance coaching, I could check in with them, but generally we let them, just in case they want to do their thing, and we're talking about people's finances, we're not reaching out for that data, but. So.
I know Boulder County Personal Finance does reach back out for like just check-ins, but I don't know how much they record, if that's something that they record, and or how many participants actually respond.
And I think that is something that could be an interesting conversation to bring back to council if on that side council is interested in having that conversation, trying to see what other data we can dig out of that.
Really quick, is this through the Community Action Program for Boulder County?
Mhm.
No?
Can I follow up there? I just to give some context, that question was based on the presentation last time, that what I heard, what I received was, the example was True North, and that people weren't ready,
Yeah.
and so it's like, we're coming into all these complications. So just to give some context is the question, and I believe there's an opportunity, and I think that we could certainly do that preparedness work in addition to partnership that you talked about. So I just wanted to give some context. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I can say, like, in my work working with participants, many of whom want to become homeowners one day, but fall kind of within that category of the folks who didn't qualify for True North. I can say that there could be improvement, I think, in the county and in the city for more programming to help prepare them. Personal finance definitely is like that starter point to like get with someone and say like, this is where you're at, this is where you're going, and these are some action steps you can take now. But I think the follow through is really going to be important. What program will provide that? I'm not sure. I know like the PI program maybe is something that provides kind of that step, one-on-one follow through with folks. Maybe FSS. But that's just for a very small group of folks, and so for the general population, I'm not sure that
we did
necessarily
increase our
exists.
funding allocation to the personal finance program, knowing that we were going to send True North buyers directly through them. So all
Right.
True North buyers are required to go and have an initial consultation with them, just to make sure that they're aware of what they're getting into. But yeah.
Yeah. Something I think this group is wrestling with overall is the intersection of housing and development. And something I do want to note, like True North was not an urban renewal project. No. And these programs are not within the purview of the Urban Renewal Authority. They are absolutely relevant for how we house people and the types of housing and services and financials that we provide. But in terms of what this group, what the Urban Renewal Authority has within its purview, changing those programs is really not an option for us. It's important for us, I think, to be informed of what those services and programs are. But I just want to make it clear for everyone here, like this is not that vehicle for making those types of changes. I just want everyone to be on the same page there. Molly, I think there were a couple other clarifications you wanted to speak to as well.
Sure. The next question is regarding down payment assistance. I know last presentation I did present that because down payment assistance is a loan, for those buyers that are struggling with their debt to income ratio, that can be a challenge anyway. So the question is, what other ways could we fund reduction of price or loan amount and include that in a recapture process or program? That would fall into that same bucket. That down payment assistance is a program that City Council has supported in funding and growing, but that would not be something that would be eligible for this body to be considering.
Could you just clarify like what you mean by eligible for this body to be considering? Like
down payment assistance is not something that, for example, TIF revenue could be used for.
Okay.
Third question, what methods are in the TIF Blight list of approved funding infrastructure or other that would allow us to include homeownership or support homeownership? What portion of construction defect penalty, well, yeah, that's part two. let's pause there though, because I think Jen, wanted to help bring in some information for this one.
So we've talked about this a little bit, but here's the list of what blight is. So some are deteriorated or deteriorating structures, defective or, like insufficient street layout, which we just talked about, faulty lot layout in relation to size or accessibility or accessibleness, unsanitary, unsafe conditions, deterioration of site or improvements on the site, unusual topography, things that are in the title that would make it unmarketable, existence of conditions that are, endanger life or property or fire or other causes, buildings that are unsafe or unhealthy for people to live in or work in, environmental contamination in buildings. So we know that there are some other projects where urban renewal is envisioned to be used. For example, the sugar mill, if it were ever to come into the corporate boundary and be part of urban renewal, it has some contamination. So is there a world where the urban renewal could be used for that remediation related to the environmental on the sugar mill? And then inadequate public improvements or utilities. So those are the only things that tax increment financing for an urban renewal can be, that's the charge, is to eliminate blight. And so there's a whole other list of, how that's interpreted in terms of what the uses are, but addressing hindrances for redevelopment, including challenges to access and circulation, drainage, detention, wastewater infrastructure, inadequate horizontal infrastructure, so site acquisition or preparation, so demolishing unsafe structures or preparing the site for redevelopment, environmental cleanup, as I just mentioned, including active remediation, removal, mitigation, or neutralization of hazardous substances or pollutants or contaminants, infrastructure and public improvements such as extension or upgrading of horizontal infrastructure, including streets, sidewalks, water lines, sewer lines, stormwater facilities, detention facilities, drainage systems, public amenities, so landscaping that could include rain gardens or functioning stormwater treatment, safety lighting, parking structures that serve the public, and associated costs for like engineering, surveying, etc. So those are kind of the list of, there are probably other public improvements that could meet the requirement for that public improvement that's part of the elimination of blight, but it really needs to be in that category of the dollars that are created by the increment that are going to address those blight conditions.
Thanks, Jen. A couple questions maybe to build on this. So I think where our discussions in the past as a group have gone is, hey, if we're able to leverage tax increment financing as an incentive here, even if it can be just used for these purposes, that is contextually relevant for what else the project might bring to the table, right? And so I think that's part of where this body's mindset has been in the past. And also, we've only seen really one project formally in the last year as a group. And I was wondering if you could speak to both like the project level use of TIF, which we just saw and talked about with regard to the old Walmart site and the Highness project, the retreat at Longmont, and more district level TIF approaches, and how those vary and how they're used in different ways. And it could be you or Katie as well.
Yeah, I think maybe we both will jump in here. So you do see urban renewal dollars that are used in a capital stack. So the project itself is creating,
like we just
saw. Like the project itself is creating property tax. That property tax is through this urban renewal plan is part of the TIF structure. There's an agreement specifically with that development that uses the increment that's created by the development that goes back into the development. So that's one methodology. There's also projects where you have 100 acres, say, and everything. So when the condition survey, the blight study happens, it looks at the whole area. What is this area blighted, and how many conditions does it have throughout the whole area? And then anything that is new and constructed in that area. So you have a new hotel and you have a new apartment building and you have a new grocery store. As those things start from the base, there's increment that's created, and that goes back into the urban renewal special fund and can be used for addressing elimination of blight for other things. So an example could
Not
be
tied to that grocery store.
not tied to that grocery
apartment.
store, not tied to that hotel. So actually, I think, so what that looks like is you have the base assessed valuation, and this is true of both types of projects, but you have that base assessed valuation goes up every 2 years with a reassessment. And then the green line is how much is the increment that's being created over time. And so everything that's between the red and the green is new revenue over the base that can be invested. So in my 100-acre example, you could have those dollars, whatever they are, and they could, if you knew you had something specific you wanted to address that needed remediation, you could take those increment dollars and invest it in the remediation so that that property could be cleaned up and then sold or whatever that looks like. So Katie, I don't know if you want to add maybe some experience that you have.
Yeah, so in a previous life of the last city I worked for, we had very large areas, which is also in context with it's pre-1347. Now there's some rules about like you have to
What
drive.
is 1347?
It's about the taxing entities that are represented in those. Before 1348, did I say 1347? 1348 is that you didn't have to have the taxing entities represented in these conversations. So these areas were very large, and so now those boundaries need to be drawn pretty narrowly. But like I said, I came from the city of Lakewood, so the entirety of Colfax, from Sheridan to the Mills, was an urban renewal area. And so part of my job there was that we were identifying blighted motel properties within the boundaries, buying them with willing buyer, willing seller, remediating them of their environmental issues, mostly asbestos, demoing them and then putting them back onto the market. And then during that time, those clean sites could then be, the value of the property could be added into the deal to get something like affordable housing done on that site. So the TIF dollars were not going towards affordable housing, but the end product was.
Yeah, Vice Chair McGovern.
Yeah, so I always go back to like the role of city council and the role of Laura, and there's a distinction between those two. And you know, city council sets vision, city council sets priorities, and then Laura executes said vision. So within that context, you know, couldn't Laura leverage TIF to incentivize private development to prioritize affordability? And there's a distinction between affordability for rental and affordability through ownership. And we all agree that we need both, but we really need more affordable ownership. So couldn't the Laura board, on behalf of the council's vision, prioritize or try to incentivize affordability ownership through reducing blight?
So there are a couple pieces to your question.
Yeah.
I might actually hit pause on the answer to that because I think, Molly, you were going to speak to the other question that was submitted that relates to deed restrictions and ownership. Do you want to maybe chime in here with that?
So the last question, let's get back to it just a moment.
Well said.
Sorry, my mouse is wanting to be slow, so there we go. Okay. Laura this is question number 4. Laura could work on redevelopment versus construction. Has Longmont considered purchase and creating deed restrictive ownership in the vein, I'll say, of scattered site home ownership? Lafayette recently shared about 2 units. Boulder has a similar program. So I will say overall, we're talking about resources here and then need. So yes, there's a need. When you look at our existing housing needs assessment, it actually shows that the greatest mismatch of incomes to incomes of our existing residents to housing available, it's in the lowest rental range. It's in those lowest affordability ranges. That's the biggest mismatch in our town. when you're in the homeownership range, yes, we want to move people from rental to homeownership whenever they are ready, but they are in that same income band of affordability where we do have a flush amount of supply in the rental market. So it's about those that are looking for sustainable housing, being able to stay in, and then here you're looking about housing mobility. So that's on the needs side. On the resources side, Longmont has about 158 deed restricted units already in existence before True North. It was up to 200 in 2010, but when the original inclusionary housing ordinance went away after the market crash, we started losing units as they aged out of the program. True North is 185 units that are coming. That is incredibly ambitious for a program of Longmont size. I have to stress that. Boulder, the comparison, Boulder has a very robust homeownership program. They do buy market rate units, renovate them, deed restrict them, and sell them at the rates that they want to, which is a good way, it's a great method. And then your actual investment is, just the difference. We do not, so far, we have not had that type of capacity in our funding wheelhouse or staffing wheelhouse. Boulder House Homeownership Program has a team, we have one person. 185 units for one person is very ambitious. And that is a real thing. So we are doing everything we can to try and use our resources wisely, present to follow council's lead on what they would like to see, and then try and put out those resources in a way that leverages other sources as much as possible to bring more in, knowing that we're starting from here and leveraging to build it. Just also, Longmont's inclusionary housing, our fee in lieu is our major revenue source for the Affordable Housing Fund that we then put out to leverage other funding sources and get affordable housing actually built. For example, if a market rate developer built 100 single family detached 1,500 square foot homes, their fee in lieu in Longmont at our 12% rate, just doing a very simple calculation, is about $2 million for a 100 unit development. In Boulder, that same development's fee in lieu revenue, $7.3 million. So they're amplified from where we are, and that
because of the property tax valuation there in particular, or
it's that their fee in lieu rate is 25% and ours is 12%. So we're doing math equations all day long. How can we maximize what we can put out there with the tools that we are working with here?
And I think so when we went through this with council, I think it's not every community is equal. So when you look at the average sales price of a home in Boulder and you compare it to the average sales price here, there is a reason they can charge 25% because they're selling for over 7 digits.
Right.
So there's a piece of that.
The markets can support that.
So that was a big part of the conversation when the council created it, was really rooting in, because you also don't want to destabilize that sort of middle market either, because then that creates a different problem. And you start moving in that direction. The other piece in terms of what we've talked about in terms of buying homes is if, as we work through the True North market, what we know is that we're probably on the capital A affordable side subsidizing it by about $130,000, $140,000.
Up to 150.
Up to 150, depending on the style. Well, if you buy a home for $500,000, you take that same amount that you're using to purchase the home and then redo it, you're actually able to then build 3 homes in the True North market versus just getting one. So the economic evaluation that we're going through is really about how do you maximize the dollars you have to really create more unit generation in the process. Mm-hmm. So it gets pretty detailed in the pro forma when we're evaluating those options.
So generally, going back to the scattered site and the buy down program as I have it, that's on my wish list. But at some point while I'm here, I want to be able to do that. We have to ramp up a little bit to be able to handle that type of program. It is a pretty robust program to undertake. And again, when we're talking leveraging, you can focus on a unit at a time, or right now, the council direction was yes, go on True North, which is focusing on a development at a time.
Great. Thank you for that, Cardi. So just also to bring this back to the, sorry, did you have a question on that?
I do have a question. Your comments have brought up more questions for me, but, when you're talking about, we have a greater number at the lower income levels and not as many people, are you just, considering individuals, you know, just counting heads basically? But are you factoring in who they are and where they work? For instance, are these people that work in Longmont that have to live outside of Longmont? Do you see what I'm saying?
This is
and so the heads
yes.
are not being counted.
Correct.
Okay.
We do our best to count that, and we can figure out some data about commute patterns and that type of thing to see how many people are coming into Longmont. But the gold standard, or maybe gold standard because that's what we have, is census data, which counts the heads that are here. So we can do a lot of information with the data on the people that we have here. When you're thinking about those that want to move here because they have a job here, the outside data sources can be helpful. When a developer decides to undertake a project, whether it's rental or home ownership, they're doing market studies to show lenders that they can make this project work. And that's when they're looking at capture rates overall, and that is more all-encompassing. So there is that kind of data that can be useful in this arena.
And just two other quick questions. One is, how many people are leaving because they want to have a family and they just don't have the space and availability for housing?
So that's not a census question, so that would be like a community survey type question.
Correct. And
that would be more specific.
Second thing, which now, see, I go down like a rabbit hole. Second thing is, fall back in my head again. I'm sorry, I'll come back to it.
Great. So pulling this conversation back together for Lura's purposes here, when we're thinking about project-based TIF use, that's what we just saw of like reinvesting into a specific project to make it more, to make it pencil. When we think about district TIF, which I expect is going to be more common actually as we start to move into more of the broader First and Main and possibly other parts of the Southeast urban renewal area conversations, we're going to start to be thinking about this more on a district basis of which projects are going to be marketable on their own, what's the TIF revenue we capture from that, to go into this urban renewal reinvestment fund, basically, butchering the name of that officially, but, and then we figure out in what situations we want to eliminate blight with the dollars collected from other marketable projects. Does that distinction make sense overall?
Yeah, and I think I would add is that also, I mean, I was working on a pro forma just now. Lura is one component of the capital stack, and probably not
for the First and Main garage.
Just any project.
Yeah.
It is one component of the capital stack, and it's almost in some ways, if I look at like RTD, it's a gap filler. Because as Teresa and I are working on this, probably most of the funding is probably going to need to come from on the city side of the house in terms of filling gaps. And so it's never going to be the single source of funding in these projects. It's just one of many sources of funding as we're looking at this.
I have remembered my last question.
Go for it.
This is simple. So the assessment that we're working on was from 2021. Would the next assessment be as current as 2025?
So the 2023 housing needs assessment used a combination of the most recent census data available, which was 2021, and more recent sources where we could pull them or did our own survey out there to figure it out. So we have some data that's current as of 2023. So the new one, the census data, I assume we're in early 2026, I assume we'll be able to be pulling 2024 census data and then doing some special questions to get some more current data, specifically on our rental market now that we've had a supply change that's come in.
Great.
So we're always going to be a year or more behind potentially.
Specifically on census data, yes.
Great. Okay. Building on one of the other questions we received and some of the threads from last time, I actually have a question for all of you. And actually, I have two questions for all of you. And I'm going to ask you to take about 3 minutes to all think about that. And then I actually want to hear from the group before we move on from the housing conversation for today. So the two questions I have, number one, what does employee housing or student housing look like to you? That's question one. What does that mean to you? What does employee or student housing or workforce housing mean to you? It builds on where Commissioner Chris was going with this too. Question two. Describe in 2 sentences or less. We're not going on any like soliloquies here. Describe in 2 sentences or you're welcome, Commissioner McQuay. Describe in 2 sentences or less the role of market rate housing in Longmont.
The role of.
So question one, what does employee, workforce, and or student housing mean to you? Question two, in 2 sentences or less, describe the role of market rate housing in Longmont. Market rate meaning not intentionally subsidized at affordable or attainable levels.
Not income restricted.
Not income or deed restricted. Take 3 minutes to think about that, and then I'm gonna probably look at Commissioner Parker to kick us off in 2 minutes.
Thank you.
What is the learning objective? Why are we doing this?
A fair question.
Yeah.
The reason why we're doing this is because the questions we've received and the topics we've discussed have stretched a wide range of housing issues and housing questions. And I'm not sure that we even know how each of us think about housing in different ways.
Okay.
And from a clarity for staff and overall future direction. And frankly, this conversation, like any conversation we have in a public setting, is a market signal too. The clarity that we can provide helps indicate to future developers, for redevelopment partners, and for our staff who are working on this, the types of things that we mean when we say, well, we want employee housing. Well, that could look like 5 different things. And so I do genuinely think it's valuable for us to understand from each other what that means to each of us. Just like if I said the color purple, you might picture a color, but there are a lot of different shades. Just ask Crayola, like how many different shades of purple there are. There are different shades of types of housing too. So as we think about the types of redevelopment that we're looking to see here, if we just say we want student housing, we just say we want employee housing, or we just want affordable housing, there could be a lot of different definitions there. Does that help lend clarity?
Yes, it does.
Of course.
And then what rubric would you be using to evaluate our?
This is not graded. This will not be graded.
It just
There
feels
is
like
also,
a school assignment.
I don't have the privilege of teaching during the day, so no.
It's okay to be a student.
There-
Yeah, I know.
No, that's right. This is not going to be graded, nor is there a right answer inherently.
No, I'm.
Right, and I think
Except
that's the
my
important thing.
answer.
This is subjective and in the eye of the beholder in a lot of ways, but it's in the eye of the decision makers at the table.
Okay.
As we start to think
No,
about where
that's-
this goes,
that is helpful.
That's what I'm trying to signal there from an overall clarity and understanding. Take 30 more seconds quietly to get your thoughts together on 2 questions, and then Commissioner Parker, I will put you on the spot to kick this off. Ready to kick us off?
Sure. So employee or student housing, my first thought in my mind was something like a dorm or an apartment complex. But that's all I can really think about.
So serving those populations is what
Pretty
those
much,
types of
yeah.
things.
That's what I visualized when you asked the question, what do I see in employee or student housing? I see dorms, apartment complexes, maybe large houses that are divided up into 5, 6 units. The market rate, it's a tough one. I look at it like, I was trying to cheat and Google some stuff, but I see it as the market rate, the increasing or decreasing the supply of the housing, right? So depending on what that would do, so it would either increase or decrease the supply, which can affect the affordability of the housing.
I mean, we saw that here. I mean, I've seen it 2 or 3 times in the last 20 years where the supply of the housing is abundance, so the prices come down. And then I see where there's no supply. But there's several factors that impact it. Interest rates and so many different things can impact it, but I would just say overall supply.
Thank you. We'll save the rest for your
Thank you.
dissertation.
Yeah, I'll keep working.
Vice Chairman Gilbray, employee student housing.
So when I think of workforce housing and student housing, I think of the same type of housing in many ways, because the students I serve at the college, for example, most of my students are working adults, they have jobs, and so I'm assuming that our students and our workforce have living wage jobs, and that really changes the housing. But I agree, dormitories. I also think of like, what does a student need? They need ease of transportation. They need entertainment and food. They need access to all these things. Walkability. Urban campus checks all those boxes. They've got access to a library that's walkable. So lots of those kind of surrounding amenities that students and workforce need access to, like groceries. When I think of market rate, exactly what Wes said, I think it's a good indicator of how stable your market is. Like how is your business community thriving? Market rate is dictated by the market. So I know we talk a lot about affordability, but if somebody owns a commercial property and market rate helps them because they could make more money investing in their property. And so market rate is not always a bad thing. It's a good indicator of how our economy is doing at a very micro level.
Thank you. Commissioner Vincent.
All right. So basic definition, what does employee housing and student housing look like to you? So it's just housing costs that allow for different types of families to meet their other basic needs, and if possible, allow for increasing savings and generational wealth, if possible. So different types of housing and costs that allow people to pay for childcare, food, transportation, and potentially have a little bit of money in the piggy for a rainy day. I think if we were to get to that as a city, that would be wonderful. And so that comes with different types of housing for different people, which comes to my second point here, describe in 2 sentences or less the role of market rate housing. So I was just having a conversation with a really good friend, and so different types of housing and models for all different types of income levels. Gentrification exists when higher income earners come in and take up the lower cost income stock and pushes out working class folks, which we're trying to provide housing for. So essentially, like, if we don't have those larger, nicer market rate, more expensive housing, then the folks who desire to live here in Longmont, who come from outside of Longmont, then come and take that lower stock away from our working class folks who make a lower income. And so I'm learning that there is a role there that is played, and so and then also a point that my friend brought up was, and then when allowing like larger homes to be built, more expensive homes, some of the families that already paid off their homes are able to grow into those homes and open up that stock for those first-time home buyers and families that maybe want to plant their roots here. And so that's kind of where market rate falls in place with me.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Lago.
So, I look at workforce housing and student housing in a little different track, where student housing would be that would lean more heavily towards the rental side, or maybe house sharing.
Does it exist, right?
Yeah, does that exist? And then the workforce housing, I think about where we're at in this day and age, because for the school district, that includes our early career teachers who, have multiple degrees. Our bus drivers, our nutrition services, paraprofessionals, classified staff, and as well as people who work at the grocery stores or Walmart. So that workforce housing, you know, that meets people who are taking care of families. So what kinds of opportunities, so it could be a mix of for purchase, affordable and attainable housing, or that middle class, mid-tier housing like True North, or rental space. So, you know, I kind of put those two in two different buckets. As far as the market rate, and you know, I mean, I feel like it is a human right for people to have a home. And so what I struggle with and what I grapple with is what I've seen, you know, market rate housing back in the day, anybody who, you know, had just a, not minimum wage job, but just a living wage could afford a market rate home. And now the prices have so superseded salaries and wages that it's become unattainable to even look at market rate in that respect. I like that, you know, how you pointed out, you know, just outside people coming in who can afford to pay cash outright for these houses, and then it impacts the rest of the market and people's ability to acquire these homes. So yeah, so I do struggle with my own definition of market rate, because I feel like, you know, one person, one home. I'm like, don't be buying up all the houses, because that takes away from other stock, and then it drives those prices up. So, but I also need to know that, you know, putting in my city council lens, or HAB, or Lura HAB, you know, kind of looking at it through that lens, it's a little different than, you know, I know that I'm going to have to be flexible in my own grappling of what I think market rate should be.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Cochran.
Thank you. So for me, employee housing is something that is to me more rental, where it's close to the employer, where somebody who's in an entry-level position can afford to live close by, so they're not having to commute and having a vehicle with expensive gas and insurance. And considering all those are going up. But workforce housing that is close by, that people can afford and also save, so they can get out of that. So it's controlled, where it's restricted to the workforce, but then they can graduate out and eventually save and buy something. Student housing needs to be extremely affordable, because student loans are very expensive. And we really want to make sure that students are in a community where they can thrive, and to make sure that they have something that they can very easily get to and from school, so they can focus on their education. For me, what the role of market rate is basically the health of our stock, making sure that we have all types of inventory available, to make sure that folks who are on the lower end have that inventory available, because like you said, if the folks who can afford a little bit more but there's no inventory in that sector start buying down because that's what's available, that's, to me, market rate is the health of our housing stock.
Thank you. Commissioner Christ.
So I think it goes back to the prior vision of the city council, which is to people to be able to be born here and live here their whole life. So it's a cycle of life, a cycle of housing has to support that. And that will change, you know, when you're a student, you're chief and maybe have a lot of roommates, and as you develop, you move into different types of housing. And at some point, at the apex of your career, maybe into market rate housing, or my neighbors have the nicest house on the block and are double income, no kids. It's important because they're paying more taxes than the rest of us, which our children have enjoyed greatly. Okay. In terms of this, they always say to me, well, we don't even have kids, we paid all this to the school districts, like in our children. Thank you for that. But then those individuals, they're eventually going to downsize or, you know, reclassify themselves. And if they do happen to have children, sometimes their children move in to take care of them. So it's really just a cycle of life. The cycle of housing needs to follow. There needs to be something available to meet people where they are in their cycle.
Thank you. Commissioner Barthels.
Well, I'll start with student housing. it's temporary housing. They're not gonna be here forever. Hopefully they're not gonna be destructive, but it's gonna be a rental type situation. And whether the city wants to get into that because we're gonna have the community college expand, but nobody from CSU or CU is gonna come here to be getting an apartment to be able to go to school. I mean, it's just so, that's no competition for that, because other districts have one tough. When you saw worker housing, my mind goes immediately to the workers' camp that we had for the field workers. Now, I don't even know who was in charge of that. I just know there were always cars there in the summertime, and then after harvest, it was empty. And so when you say worker housing, that pulls my focus to that because it's seasonal. And just like student housing, I don't consider that permanent housing. Even apartments, I would consider not permanent. People stay in apartments. So then that takes you to the market, and that has to be arranged. I mean, when I went to DC to work, I stayed in an apartment, got married, and my VA for the first house with no money down for almost nothing. Within 3 years, it had doubled in value. Moved, used that equity, moved. Another 3 years, the place I had was tripled. And so the market, you can't look at the market as expecting time. It has to be arranged, and to able to have everybody participate, there has to be a range in the market. It has to be some lower priced housing. Doesn't have to be a mansion. It's livable, and then people learn how to handle that, and they move up, and they'll move. You know what? Right now, in some parts of Longmont, nobody's moving. You know, we have that in our school district. We have schools that are just completely surrounded by people my age.
Oh, wow.
Which is really old, by the way. And they're going to stay there. They raised their family there, and the kids may come back from another state where they're working or something. But so when you say the market value, I know there's a number that says this is the market value in Longmont, but that's not true because that market value has a massive range from lower value to higher value. And that's all my thoughts are on that.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Mr. McCoy?
Well, I think this is our cerulean moment when we think about how we think that somehow we're running the show and directing it, but in truth it's being picked and selected for us somewhat because that's what the market is driving. And so I think that in a perfect world it's generational housing, where people, to what Commissioner Pareto was saying in regards to how families live together, and that even includes with the dynamic of Front Range Community College, the students that are living there. It is sometimes multi-individual, like apartments, sort of like group sort of housing in the sense of like people do when they go to college, oftentimes share a apartment or a house or whatever. And I like what Commissioner McGillicuddy was saying in regards to the walkability and the concepts of that, but I think that's where we're heading. And in regards to our Front Range passenger rail and the First and Main project and other things like that. So, it is row housing, it is apartments, it is this. I hadn't thought of the dormitory concept of it. I don't think that we're there right now. It might be 20 years before we get to the metropolitan state kind of concept where they're now just putting in dorms in the last decade or so.
So I think some of those sort of things, we have had some of it picked for us, but I think we can make choices in that still by the types of housing. Maybe it's smaller houses, maybe it's row houses, maybe it's more of those types of things that will help people get into home ownership and generational wealth, that sort of stuff. But we have to recognize where we are. You know, people are commenting about how Longmont's got so many apartments. It was only until they started breaking ground that people started noticing that, even though that had happened literally probably in many of their eyes, and many of them had started 7 or 8 years beforehand to doing that. Now, as far as your point there about market, you know, having been on council when the market bubble burst, and it was all we could do is to make sure that the housing that was being abandoned and left and everything wasn't destroyed in the process. That I would hope that we never revisit that time frame again.
Thank you. Commissioner Lechman?
Yeah, thanks. I think you were right. We have a lot of different thoughts. And I was, employee housing, I can give my perception, but I was thinking about development, and employers that have tried to come into Longmont don't have employee housing for all employees. I just think it's an interesting what our perception is. So my responses to your question, one, what does employee workforce or student housing look like to you? It's an opportunity to live in dignity, be secure, close enough to ride, bike, or walk, and be connected to the community that we work in. The question 2 on market rate housing in Longmont, the ability for someone to invest in their community, provide stability and wellness through ownership of the possibly largest asset one has, which opens the door to next life steps and opportunities.
Great. Thank you for leading the way in succinctness too. Much appreciated. I have one, I guess I'll add 2 thoughts since I skipped over myself for the sake of that initial discussion. I'll just add, I think I share many of the similar sentiments there. I think when we think about workforce housing, I do think about that early career entry level, a little bit more flexibility of types of units as well, and even smaller types of units than we even see now that just allow someone to have that convenience or accessibility to the job. And then when I think about market rate housing, I also think about desirability of the community, and what brings people here, what makes people want to invest in our community, and a little bit building on Commissioner Prieto's thoughts, and how is that a pressure relief valve on the most affordable housing as well, by kind of mitigating the supply, by increasing the supply enough so that there isn't tension around kind of the borderline affordable, attainable units that people are competing for. And then the last thing I absolutely think about kind of the role of policy in shaping markets. I think the biggest one that comes to my mind is the construction defects law at the state level, of how it's shaped our market around rental versus for sale housing. Not just shaped, but transformed the state's market. So I appreciate everyone contributing to that. I hope you digest what people say. Jen, I have one last question maybe for you and Molly before we move on to the last item on our agenda. What is the role of market rate housing in an urban renewal area specifically, and in terms of the tax increment financing that's collected in, say, like a deed restricted affordable property versus a market rate rental property?
So it's interesting, I think.
Again, in 2 sentences or less.
Sure. Challenging subject. It used to be that in urban renewal, the focus was on commercial only. Wow. And that there was never any idea that housing would be part of an urban renewal strategy in the recent kind of time frame. And it does provide increment because it's new development that has new property tax that would go into the urban renewal either as a district or into a capital stack for a particular project.
Anything you want to add? Final thoughts?
Deed restricted are often tax exempt, property tax exempt. Rentals in particular, depending on, like True North is not tax exempt because it's being developed officially by a private developer, in a public-private partnership, but that is the developer. So it would not contribute so much to that TIF revenue picture.
So you're saying like a housing,
In an urban
along
area.
a housing authority property
Property.
would not contribute to the tax revenue for the district?
Right.
Okay.
I thought that Commissioner McElroy asked a question about how we would use this body to incentivize, and I don't know if we got back to it. And maybe that's where you were going, so excuse me.
Yeah, we're not gonna answer that question today, but it's, just because there's a lot of
Just 'cause
pieces
I
to that.
asked.
Yeah, only because it was related to what Molly was answering before, and I think it's not that we're not gonna answer it, that goes in a lot of different rabbit holes in terms of the role, but I think what Jen was clarifying, I think we actually answered it in a couple pieces. When we were talking about project versus district TIF, and kind of the use there, we were talking about how we do use TIF dollars for certain blight elimination on a specific project or at a district level, and then the question for us is when we do collect more TIF beyond an individual project, how do we use that to actually, I don't want to say subsidize, but maybe reduce some of the costs of other improvements that we're thinking about more holistically that build into the housing and cost of living conversation. So let's sleep on that now for the sake of this discussion. Thank you, Molly, for returning. I'm going to move on. Thank you, Molly, for returning for a second Longmont Urban Renewal Authority meeting. And thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that. We're going to move on to our next item on the agenda under special reports and presentations. Presentation from our staff, City of Longmont staff in our planning department. That's Jennifer Hewitt-Apperson, Principal Planner, and Grant Penland, our Director of Planning and Development Services, on the MUIR zone, or Mixed Use Innovation and Redevelopment Zone. Jennifer, Grant, take it away.
All right. Are you driving? Am I driving?
I can drive because of the clicker situation.
Okay. I recall it being a little
So I think
spicy in here.
She must drive.
Yes, she must drive.
Yes,
I apologize for the inconvenience. That's okay. That's okay. All right, so some of you guys, Jennifer Hewitt-Apperson, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Principal Planner over Long Range Planning for the City of Longmont and Planning and Development Services. Some of the folks here are familiar with this concept, some new to other folks. So I want to talk a little bit about mixed use innovation and redevelopment, or MUIR, or MUIR, which is a zoning district we're proposing and in response to guidance from City Council that really will be a tool for promoting mixed use and urban scale development in targeted areas. So just kind of what I'm going to cover, and we'll try to keep it in the interest of time brief. Going to give some background on kind of how we got here, talk a bit about what the role of zoning is, what zoning can accomplish. You know, I always joke that zoning saves lives, but it can't do everything. So it's a good slogan. I love it. Touch a little bit on our urban neighborhood design standards, Section 800, that are adopted as part of our development standards for public works and such. Touch on some historic preservation tools that could be partnered, that could really kind of link up with this type of zoning tool. Again, zoning saves lives, can't do everything. Discuss how some urban design tools that we could incorporate into the zoning component to accommodate diverse needs of our population, of our community, of our businesses. And I want to introduce you to the story map that our team has put together, which is I think pretty interesting and a good-looking tool to really overview everything. So our area of focus might be a little hard to see. So it's this area outlined in blue. So it includes portions of the Southeast Urban Renewal area and portions of the Sugar Factory and Steam sub-area plans. So the areas that aren't included are primarily, such as down here, they're city-owned. They aren't really developable, so it didn't make sense to include those. Certain areas may have some development going on or aren't in urban renewal areas. So we're really focused on urban renewal areas, potential urban renewal areas. So in terms of background, this goes back to April of last year. So we were directed by council to it really investigated potential redevelopment incentives that could really spark creative and innovative projects within certain targeted areas of the city. So we came back, part of that was looking at building height as well. Where, are there places in the city where, taller buildings might be more appropriate than others? So we came back in August and provided some potential standards for taller buildings. We specified this area of focus. We had the discussion about whether we should create a new overlay zone or do a new zoning district. And we are recommending a new zoning district for a number of reasons that I will be happy to discuss at another time. So in February we came back to City Council and discussed some of our findings and what we were looking at. And we're directed to proceed with community engagement and developing this new district with application to the target area. The discussions about redevelopment goals and potential regulatory tools to incentivize began last year, and we've been working on refining it and making sure that we're all on the same page moving forward. So, kind of touched on why this area of focus. So, Envision Longmont really identified this as one of the key focus areas for future development and redevelopment within the city. It has been the target of a few different planning initiatives, including a Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Program, or TAP report, which then rolled into the Sugar Factory and Steam Sub-Area Plan, which was finalized in 2023 and accepted by City Council then. This area also, as I mentioned, includes the Southeast Longmont URA. It is the location of the future First and Main Transit Station, and there are, real potential for catalyst projects here, such as Front Range Community College moving forward. There are, while it is, there are significant areas of brownfields that need to be remediated prior to development. It is one of the few parts of Longmont that does really have large areas of undeveloped land that are encumbered by something like, say, the airport. Next. So, what can zoning accomplish? So, zoning in the city of Longmont is memorialized in Section 15 of the municipal code. So, zoning sets parameters for future development and redevelopment. It identifies permitted uses, building height, massing standards, your development standards, setbacks, design elements, compatibility standards, etc. When we're looking at adaptive reuse, which I know is a tool that could be a really interesting thing to use in this target area to really help create a very distinctive place that really reflects the history of Longmont. We don't currently have these provisions within our code, but what other cities have done to promote adaptive reuse would be, say, waiving certain processes, maybe it's all administrative, offering certain bonuses like height or density, for example. I've seen where maybe there's a parcel that has a potentially historic property on it and some other available land, so maybe there are some bonuses that if you preserve this building and do an adaptive reuse project on this, you can do more of something on this other part of your site. There are potential, we have the potential to be flexible regarding development standards such as landscaping, buffers, etc. There's the opportunity for expedited review. We do some of these currently within our code for inclusion for affordable housing. So there is some, precedent for using these tools, and it's something commonly used throughout the country. The other thing with zoning is it can be unique to align with your adopted or accepted plans, and that's exactly what we're looking to do here with the NUIR, is create a unique zoning district that aligns with the sub-area plan and all the various other plans and projects that have been done in this area. Does not address financial incentives. It doesn't get into fee waivers. It doesn't get into infrastructure costs. It doesn't get into building or fire code requirements. Totally different processes that would need to be pursued. But it can tie into those very well. So, in terms of, just as again, overview background on the MUIR district, as I mentioned, it would only currently apply to target areas identified by City Council. So, it's a two-step process. First, we have to establish the zoning district and adopt it into Chapter 15. That would be considered a legislative action. Then we would need to apply it to the targeted area, which would be a quasi-judicial action. So, Eugene, stop me if I'm saying anything wrong.
Nodding my head.
So there's so like I said, there's two different actions. The other challenge with this area is there is that large section of the sugar factory area that is a county enclave. It's not incorporated. However, by establishing a zoning district that would establish parameters for the type of development we want to see in that area, at which point those properties do get annexed into the city, they can go ahead and be swept into this district. So in terms of bulking and massing, we would anticipate that the lot size and setbacks would be consistent with our other mixed-use zones, but rather than the maximum building height be 4 stories with a potential of height bonuses up to 7 stories, we would, in certain areas where it would be determined to be appropriate, not everywhere in the target area, discuss the potential of allowing 7 stories, potentially with those bonuses up to 10. Again, not everywhere in this area. And that's, again, to be determined as well, as far as what the appropriate areas would be. So currently there are 3 height bonuses available within the code. We aren't proposing any changes to those. Those height bonuses are proximity to transit stations, which is generally, defined as a quarter mile from something like First and Main, on-site affordable housing, and a true vertically integrated mixed-use project where you have a non-residential use on the ground floor. Those are the 3 height bonuses. So you don't automatically get them. You have to, they're performance-based. You have to do something to get them. So currently we do have design standards for mixed use and non-residential buildings more than 2 stories. We would anticipate that there would be additional standards put in for buildings over 4 stories, and that really wouldn't apply just to this district. That would apply to any building over 4 stories that was able to achieve all of the height bonuses available within the mixed use district. So we would see that as being something that would be useful to do across the board. And we would also anticipate standards for street level activation. So no giant walls of concrete. You've got to do sidewalk, cafes, planters, awnings, porticos, some kind of really interesting entry feature so that when you're walking on the sidewalk, you feel like you're somewhere and you don't feel like you're, in a wind tunnel of some sort. So, next. So, one of the big reasons we're looking at zoning new district versus overlay is because we would be looking at not just different bulk height massing standards, but also a mix of uses that currently would not be available in our other mixed use zoning districts. So for example, we're looking at a true mix of higher intensity urban scale uses that are innovative, promote creative activity, promote economic activity, looking at a variety of residential types and not just multifamily. Things such as artist studios and maker spaces, small-scale artisanal manufacturing, what we're describing as clean industrial or lighter industrial of some sort, so things that would be totally enclosed, certain STEM type industries, commercial, retail, office if it ever returns, employment uses, and also civic and institutional uses, educational uses. So currently, like in our mixed-use downtown zoning district, you can do an institutional use such as Front Range Community College, but it requires approval as a conditional use. So what we would anticipate is that would not be a conditional use, that would be a use by right. So our Section 800 tie-in, so as I mentioned, Our development and design standards were amended last year to create and establish Section 800, which are known as our urban neighborhood design standards. What these do are they are new standards for utilities, roadways, and such that facilitate compact urban scale development in terms of right-of-way, lane widths, sidewalk, etc., without the need for design exceptions or PUD zoning. So think something like Prospect, which still needs a PUD zoning for a variety of reasons. However, those narrower streets, those different alleyways. So it creates those standards that really foster and facilitate the type of development we're talking about here. Really walkable, pedestrian scale, still car accessible, but doesn't feel like a freeway. You can't land a 747 on your neighborhood road here. So this section would apply in the target area. All right, so this is one of my areas here. So historic preservation tools. So zoning within the confines of Chapter 15 can encourage and incentivize innovative uses, but historic preservation tools could also offer potential incentives and tools for adaptive reuse of existing older buildings. So, some of those tools, and they're voluntary, they're totally voluntary, we can't make anyone do them, because realistically there are additional standards required, there are additional requirements for going through using some of these tools. However, if you landmark, if you designate a building as a local historic landmark, you do open up the possibility for tax incentives that could incentivize adaptive reuse. So specifically, there are federal tax credits for income generating commercial properties. There are state of Colorado tax credits for both residential and commercial properties. There are also grant opportunities through the State Historic Fund and other sources that could be used to really stack on top and help do the restoration and rehabilitation work of historic buildings if a property owner seeks to do that. So next slide. And then, if these tools are used, building rehabilitation would be guided by the Secretary of Interior standards. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's some really lovely detailed documents and technical reports on the Secretary of Interior website. But there are distinct standards for preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration. Those are actually 3 different things. And there are times when buildings just can't be saved for adaptive reuse. And in those cases, there are, if someone is interested in kind of recreating that building, it typically wouldn't be available, you typically wouldn't be able to use incentives for it, but there are standards for reconstruction. If you want to essentially replicate the historic structure, there are guidelines for doing that reconstruction if you basically only have photographic evidence or the building is collapsing on itself. So, next. All right. So I've talked a little bit about historic preservation. Urban design tools are something that can be incorporated into zoning, and that is, I think a really good use of zoning. So we're really looking at talking about walkable human scale development and redevelopment, which is the ultimate goal of the zoning district, of the NUIR district. We do recognize that there are car-centric uses. As much as we would like for everyone to bike and walk and use transit, that's not an option for a lot of people, and there are uses that just don't lend themselves to that, where there are times when you do need a car. So how do you deal with that without looking like a parking lot? So tools that can be used, we can require that parking lots or parking structures be at the rear of the building, or like in the case of First and Main and the retreat at Longmont, where the parking structure is in the middle of the building that's then wrapped around it so it's not visible. We can encourage structured parking. Admittedly, structured parking is an awful lot more expensive than surface parking, but we could look at ways to encourage that. We can increase bike rack requirements to really make it a lot easier. We can also require enhanced pedestrian-oriented elements on the street frontage when you do have these parking, when you do have uses that require parking. So there are ways we can, kind of hide that, hide parking, or make it, flow a little bit more in with compact urban neighborhood. All right, lastly, so we are at the beginning of our community engagement process. We did our first public event with the Connect Longmont event a couple of weeks ago. We had a table there. And as part of that, we debuted a story map, which this QR code will take you to. And that story map was put together by Melanie Brenton and Justin Darsh in our office, and they did an absolutely phenomenal job on it. But what it does, it includes an overview of really the history of the area. There's some great historic photographs. It talks a bit about the prior planning activities I referenced. There are links to to a lot of these previous plans where they exist. And it talks a bit about how the proposed district could bring everything together in terms of the history, the prior plans, and what we want to do to move forward. So again, that QR code will take you there. And with that, I will open up for any questions. I also will note that we are, our future, we do have some public engagement events scheduled. We will be doing presentations to the boards of LEDP in a few weeks. Talking to the Chamber's Public Policy Committee at the beginning of June, and we'll be talking to the LDDA board at the end of June. And then we anticipate that additional community engagement will occur throughout the summer with meeting with property owners, community members, other stakeholders. We're working with our comms team to really put together a robust and accessible community engagement strategy that can help guide the development of this particular process. All right.
Great. Before we go into a discussion for maybe 10-15 minutes on this, thank you. Love. It was great to see the story map at Connect Longmont. Thank you so much for the work on that. Just to frame this conversation up a little bit more for Laura, as a reminder, just like we're not a housing entity, we're not a planning entity. However, I think already you can probably see some of the intersections, not transportation-wise, but with the subject of like how we're thinking about TIF, the urban renewal areas, and kind of how those layer into some of the work that's happening in other parts of our region. The other thing that is a direct relationship here is the conversation we had at the beginning of the year actually with this group on adaptive reuse. And I think everyone but Commissioner Loachman was there in the January 6th meeting there. And we had a broad discussion on types of adaptive reuse examples and kind of got people's preferences out, heard some of that there. So this is to kind of connect a thread from that discussion into the broader planning conversation that's happening on how do we enable some of the things that then this body might then be seeing as an urban renewal authority, and or deciding what to use TIF for. Going back to that project versus district TIF conversation. So just wanted to connect the thread through all of those things to get us here. And now I will pass it over to Commissioner Cogover.
Sure. Thanks for the presentation. For the community engagement, are we also going to be looking at our advisory boards for comment?
I would anticipate that.
Other questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Cogover.
Can you go back to the one where it's from 4 to 7 stories? I don't remember what the second word is.
Close your eyes.
One more. I think it was one more. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. So what is the strategy or what's the thinking behind going from 4 to 7 stories as the base with the additional of potential height bonuses? Is it because the math wouldn't pencil out for some of these projects, or?
So we anticipate and recognize that it would be quite some time before we got those higher buildings. So this is really setting the parameters for that option if we do have a developer that comes forward. The discussion at the last year when we started this really was, well, what is the right? Are there areas where taller buildings are appropriate, what's the number. So this is really kind of what was kind of landed on in that particular council discussion. We recognize this is not an appropriate height for everywhere in the district. So we would be looking at really tailoring it. Like, for example, you wouldn't see this on Main Street. You would not see, Main Street would be Main Street. So you would not see that on Main Street. So we, based on our discussions with people in the development community, the feedback we've received is, doing buildings over like 5 or 6 stories, or really over 6, 7 stories, when you start running into requiring steel construction, currently that does not pencil out because the rents in Longmont just don't justify that. However, that's not to say they won't at some point. So we're really looking 20, 30 years out of this is what we're doing. And really there was guidance in Envision Longmont, and also in the Sugar Factory Steam sub-area plan that did recommend that additional height might be appropriate, could be appropriate in this area.
Could there be timing, phasing in of, let's say, our goal is in 30 years to unlock the 7-story building. Is there a way to phase that in where it's pre-approved, but, the first 5-10 years you're at this level and then continue to grow?
I think realistically the market will dictate that, and I think that's most realistically the market will dictate that. What we can do is we can put in locational criteria and development standards that really make sure it's the right building, the right place. Maybe there are standards that you could only do so many of a certain height on a certain block face, but that's something that we would be looking at. I don't know, Harold or Grant, do you have any thoughts on a phasing or timing?
I think the only thing I would, sorry to talk over your shoulder. I think the only thing I would add is it can always be relooked at. Obviously, we will create this zoning district. Again, the intent would be to apply to that geographic area. If council or future council wanted to investigate it 5, 10 years from now, and we look to see what makes sense, obviously, open up the code and see what makes sense and make those amendments at that time as well.
I guess I thought I heard you say, think that to add on to the height of the building, not just make the building 7, but you were suggesting adding extra floors after a certain point.
No. So we're the maximum right now is 4 with height bonuses.
Height bonuses up to 7.
We would be going from 4 to 7 as without any additional bonuses, with the intent that you could get an additional 3 height bonuses. So we would allow the maximum to go from 4 to 7.
Right. Okay, I just didn't know if you were thinking that somehow it would have an add-on when you started to say that. I misheard you.
Yep. That was related to council direction from February, I think it was early January.
So, yes. And the other thing we can do as part of this is do work with our GIS team, our GIS specialists to do that analysis in terms of at least location, looking at the transit center definition to see, this is an area where by our current code, you can currently get a high bonus for that. So that might be something helpful to look at.
So I had a question on that, which is, what's the logic of having a bonus of any kind, a height, density, whatever, when we're building the transit center within that area? Like, aren't we basically saying you're automatically getting, like, we're not attracting people to that if we're already saying, like, we're building this around you, so, or where we want to see it? Wouldn't it make more sense to, in some ways, have, say, like an adaptive reuse bonus instead of a TOD bonus in that situation? Because the TOD is already going to be there.
Yeah, we already have the TOD bonus. So, there's no reason we can't look at the adaptive reuse bonuses. It's just something we haven't explored.
You're saying we currently have a TOD bonus? We aren't proposing any new bonuses currently. We would expect that the on-site affordable housing bonus, the
vertical mixed use bonus and the proximity to a transit center bonus would stay. That's not to say there can't be others of different sorts. And you can always put a not to exceed in the code as well, so to ensure that, you know, someone isn't stacking and stacking and stacking.
Commissioner Piazza?
Maybe a silly question, maybe not. When we're talking about kind of the additional height bonuses and the special district, I can't help but think more apartments along that whole stretch. And so, like, how is this zoning also appealing to, like, single residential housing or townhomes, or are we trying to grow in such a way that it's like a small little city on its own with high buildings and industrial and different things like that?
So in our mixed use districts currently, there's a minimum density of 18 units an acre. Townhomes are permitted. It's really hard to get that minimum density if you're just doing townhomes. So we would expect or encourage, you know, we would put in language and encourage a true mix of housing types. So maybe as part of a master plan development, you could do some more cottage if you have something else that will get you to that 18. But that our goal is not to have all apartments. And again, on Main Street, we would expect that the current height limits for Main Street would stay in place. Those are discussions we've had with DPA as well.
Of course, yeah, and I'm just thinking like into the future, right?
Yeah.
So you said 18 per acre.
That's currently what our mixed use zones permit, yeah. And in the big scheme of things, that is not a very high density at all. That's extremely low when you're looking at density. If you're doing a multifamily project, you're doing like a small old school garden apartment that most developers just aren't doing anymore. But but in the big picture, 18 units an acre when you're doing a compact development, it's not that high. I mean, I can tell you from doing, block level analyses of density in some other neighborhoods of single family homes in some of our older neighborhoods, there are blocks that, density doesn't always look like what you think it does. There are blocks within, our old town areas that they're upwards of 10 units an acre, but it's all single family homes. And so,
you can throw an ADU on there and it's 22
exactly,
right there.
and you can throw an ADU on. I mean,
it doesn't look like a block.
There are different ways to do density, and by setting the parameters to do different types of units, we would, look at, we would hopefully have a fairly diverse, community. The other thing to consider too, though, is we are, in most cases, kind of at the mercy of what the market is willing to do. We can set parameters, but if no one wants to fall into those parameters, it's going to sit vacant. So we need to figure out what works.
And I'm thinking like incentives, like what can we do to make it appealing and pencil out for developers coming in? And it sounds like with the 7 to 10, like these are things that we're putting into place to attract that type of development. But like, are we also working on the opposite end for the other type of development? I'm sorry, Harold, go right ahead.
Well, just to build on that for a second, then maybe you can answer both. So we were having a conversation about employee and student workforce housing before, and I think that folds somewhat into this. I mean, how are we thinking about what types, as we get to more flexibility in types of units, even if they are for rent, if they're serving different needs and populations in our community, they're addressing gaps in a different way. And so I'm curious, you don't have to have an answer yet for like how we're going to do that, but I think that builds on the conversation we were just having as well of how do we think about types of things we're trying to encourage in here and who we're trying to encourage it for.
Yeah, I think part of what I was going to say, what's behind this, and everyone talks about the market, but the market actually starts with the land cost.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges in the areas that we're talking about is the price per square foot is dramatically higher than it is in other locations. So, like right now on the property that we were purchasing from the transit station, price per square foot is probably averaging around $45 a square foot. So when you take $45 a square foot and you're trying to put...
How does that compare to a different part of our community?
So market rate probably when we did True North and other areas is probably $18 to $20 a square foot. So it's almost
2 to 3x.
So when you take that 2x cost in the land, then how you make the pro forma start penciling
Yeah.
becomes a challenge. And then the other thing, in the areas that aren't developed where we're talking, they bring a lot of other problems. And a lot of those problems are environmental. So when you start then layering in cost per land and the environmental cleanup associated with it, things start getting squirrely pretty fast financially. But then take the sugar mill, for example. The cost per square foot may not be that high, but you're coming in probably before you do anything at depending on what level of remediation, I would probably say $30 to $50 million in remediation cost.
Yeah.
Just to start the project. So every one of these parcels brings their own characteristics and their own challenges. And prior to this council, one of the things that we talked about with the last council is, in some ways, part of why we started seeing so many multifamily units being built adjacent to neighborhoods is because it was almost, there was almost this incentive to do it, because the cost per square foot on that property is much lower than the cost per square foot on the property in these corridors where you actually want it. So then the market started finding its places. So I just wanted to say that because it starts getting really complicated once you start digging into particular sites. But to Chair Popkins' point, 2, 3x, 4x times what it costs in other places.
So just a follow-up question. So when we talk about TIF and we talk about the use of that funding, if there's special projects within the city, is there a way to either buy down land and or remediate to make it more appealing for future development that is not always X?
Yeah, so that's actually, when we talk about the sugar mill, we talk about First and Main, that's very much the approach that we're using, is how do you layer urban renewal and all of this to use that increment to buy down on the cost to take care of some of those core issues. What I said earlier, though, it's not just urban renewal. We're looking at public improvement fund, we're looking at all of our enterprise funds, because it takes all of those things layering on each other to actually be able to pull the project.
Thank you.
And I was just gonna add that, one of the things that Jen said was about zoning being, providing flexibility, providing parameters, bumpers about what uses, bulk and area requirements, how tall something could be, where it is on the lot line. But it's not intended to be an incentive, right? It can create opportunity for some of these things, but incentives generally live someplace else. So other parts of the code, other types of economic development incentives, urban renewal to help with the costs related to environmental, for example. But zoning sort of functions differently than incentive.
No, it can be a disincentive.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
that's
the
what
real
I'm saying,
thing.
is if it's too red taped.
It can be a disincentive in terms of if you're so narrow that there's not flexibility, then they're not even willing to take a risk to develop it. So while it's not an incentive, it can be a disincentive. But we have areas all over our code that do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things we're starting to look at is holistically. We're running into them right now. It's like, we have to do what and adds how much cost to this? And so I think it's the cake, and you're layering the cake where it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of zoning, it's a little bit of this, so you can bridge that gap.
Question. You mentioned kind of the carve out or the rethinking of institutions as being a conditional use in that, which makes sense given what we're absolutely discussing in this area. How do non-institutions but other types of, say, non-traditional uses like an arena or an event center factor into this as a use? How does that get considered in when you're developing a different type of mixed use district?
TBD. That's something we haven't gotten to that level yet, but we would anticipate those larger types of civic uses would be potentially available. The mechanism is the question as well. So
So that might look like a conditional use where you
Yeah.
say something about the way that the lighting happens or how loud it is, or when it, there's some use standards that are associated with the use. Could be that that's plugged in, as part of the zoning already, so it already comes pretty, packaged for what are those things in that type of use that might be parameters that kind of put some bumpers on some of those uses that, this isn't your example, but the one that I often use is a kennel facility or a doggy daycare.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like it's an innocuous kind of use, but they can be very loud. And so that's where we might have some standards, and I probably do, and I always look to Grant to tell me when I've gotten over my skis, but where we might have standards about how the use happens, and so that is something that could happen for intermediate use if we were contemplating.
I guess, we have development standards throughout our code for pretty much every use that may kick in depending on the location of the use or what district it's in.
Sorry. And so I'm just thinking creatively, and this might just be like a crazy, impossible idea, but when we think about bringing development in and making it appealing and talking about, how do we get developers to bring something in with it, or maybe preserve something like a historic building. Our city needs a library, another rec center, another, maybe another pool, like another sunset pool, who knows? Is there a way through zoning to make it so much appealing to say, hey, if you can bring in a rec center or a library, then we can work with you on this development over here in this land?
We might have to think about that one a little bit more.
Well, that's what we do in development.
We just have to
Right.
be consistent and fair.
Yeah,
Right.
it typically happens in the form of land donations
Right.
for something, but it needs to have what the lawyers like to call a rational nexus to the development.
Nexus and proportionality.
Yeah, and proportionality, yeah. So we can't just say, hey, if you want to do this, you need to give us 20 acres or how much for this use, when that use may not necessarily be related to what's being proposed.
Yeah, those exactions would be done unfavorably by the developer.
Yeah,
I would
we
think.
try really hard to not get sued and
Typically that shows itself in the development agreement, and honestly, folks that are listening to what council's talking about and just listening to the conversations tend to grab on things that they know that we're working on. Front Range is a good example. We talked about those issues and somebody saw it and said, hey, are you interested in doing this? So then it's not an exaction, but then it's a negotiated agreement where we get something that we need, they get something they need, but you can't exact it, but it's typically, if they're watching and paying attention, they will do that. And that's where the clarity, the guidance, and all of that starts coming together, because the more certainty you create, the more willing people like that are going to be to say, hey, we know you're interested in a library. What if we did this, but we gave you a location for a library? That's then when we start negotiating the development.
And that's where signals from a group that your annoying chair makes you have to talk out and read out as a group also helps you.
Yeah, and even just putting it in the paperwork, the city's looking for this, for any developers who are interested, putting that, I forgot what the term is, but it's just like a letter of intent, yeah.
And that's how True North
Sounds
happens.
like a prospectus.
that's what I
I think she's
Exactly
describing
how
more.
True North
I think she's
happens.
describing more of a prospectus, where it's
Yeah.
just more forward-looking.
And so,
Yes.
because they don't know what they don't know, and not everybody's watching these boring meetings. Just saying.
Cool.
exciting.
Commissioner Kalkofer, I believe will be our last question.
What was the preliminary feedback that you got from the community?
So it's still early. It was interesting having discussions with folks at the Connect Longmont. I definitely noticed shall we say, a generational split. A lot of our younger residents were really excited about the possibility of having compact, walkable, something that has a lot of different uses that they wouldn't need to get in their car for. Then you had other folks who just wanted to yell at us about apartments. And so it's one of those, how do we balance it? And because we are a diverse community, and we do need to meet a lot of different needs. And so, but it's very interesting. There's definitely, it's not absolute, but there definitely is a real generational difference in terms of what people are interested in. So, but yeah, it's still early. So we're working with our communications team to figure out some outreach that we can do, doing a project page with like a comment field, we can ask questions and people can respond to. Not a survey per se, but having some meaningful input via online. And again, working towards really working with the public, but first we're really working with our community partner organizations because they tend to represent, say, the business and development community as well, who would really be impacted by this also.
I was going to treat that as the last comment.
Oh, no, actually, because I haven't spoken a lot. But, so, I start thinking back on the sub-area plan in 2022, and there was a lot of the community engagement, at least for the sugar, the sugar mill site, and the First and Main area. Are you finding that there's a lot of overlap in what the feeling was? I mean, now that would be 4 years ago.
Still in the very early stages, like I said, but we are definitely building on the community engagement that's already happened.
Okay,
Because there was a lot of work that was already done, and that's part of the messaging as well. Is this proposal is not coming out of nowhere. It's not coming out of a vacuum. It's based on work that's been done in the city for over the past 4, 5, 10, 20 years. So it's really, we're really trying to move forward with recommendations so that, we don't have the proverbial plan on the shelf.
And I saw that the sub-plan area document that's 285 pages, it's on that story, it's linked on there. So if anybody wanted to take a look at that. I mean, there were advisory boards, planning and zoning, sustainability, historical preservation that all weighed in. There's a little thing on where my kids had presented around what they wanted to see in that area. Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot in there. I don't want to discredit or get rid of that.
This is additive, this is an additive effort. We are not starting anew. This is we recognize there was a lot of hard work done. There's been a lot of very valuable input and we're building on it. And part of our community education, I view a lot of what we do in planning, especially long-range planning, as community education, and making sure people know that these are topics that have been discussed for a very long time in some cases, and we're just not making things up as we go along.
Great, that was a great question, and a good one to end with. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Grant. Thanks for all the work that's been going into this so far. We look forward to hearing more at a later date. Appreciate it. And that's a great reminder, Commissioner Hidalgo-Farian, that because our packet was only 32 pages this time, if you're interested in reading a 285-page plan to catch up on that, you have all the time in the world. Great. We're going to move on to item 8 in our agenda. That's a finance report. I do believe we have a brief report from our finance director. Yes. Teresa?
So thank you for inviting me to your meeting to talk about the finances of Laura. I do understand from Jen that this is something that you would like to have on your agenda on a go-forward basis. And I am certainly open to hearing from you all what would be most beneficial for you from a financial perspective. What I have this evening for you is just a few slides on the current finances of Laura, just to kind of lay that groundwork so that you know what has happened in the past and what the tip dollars that Laura generates today are being spent on. And so it really is all about the Village of the Peaks project. And this was a public-private partnership between you all, Laura, the city, the developer, Newmark Merrill, and out of that whole conversation and also part of the whole partnership was developed the Twin Peaks Metro District. So the city was actually, back up, sorry. The city actually issued the debt for the infrastructure and public improvements at the Twin Peaks area. It is maintained by a trustee completely separate from the city at UMB Bank. And we have two sources of TIF that are used to pay that debt. So it is a property tax TIF and a very small amount of sales tax TIF. The property tax TIF did not generate enough to pay off the debt, and so the sales tax is what made up that gap.
What percentage of sales tax? Do you know? It was like, you said small percentage of the sales tax?
A small percentage, yeah, and I'll get into what that entails. So the debt was issued originally in 2014. It was 2 certificate of participation issuances that totaled about $30 million. We refinanced it at a much more reasonable, lower rate in 2022. And at the end of 25, this is what is outstanding that we still owe on these 2 debt issuances. Okay, so now the tax increment financing. So Lura collects the tax. The TIF comes into Lura, not the city. And the property tax TIF comes from the city, the school district, Northern Colorado Water District, St. Vrain Left Hand District, and the Metro District, the Twin Peaks Metro District. And very much like what Jen was saying and the resolution that you all adopted earlier this evening, Lura collects that TIF. However, we do have to rebate a portion of it back to the school district and to Twin Peaks Metro District. So we are rebating back to the school district the mill levy override that Jen was talking about earlier that will apply in that case. For the Twin Peaks number 1, we do rebate that back as well. We also rebate back, so the Metro District mill levy, in total, 2 different mills at 25 mills. The first 25 was intended to help cover the debt, so that is what Lura actually retains. We have to rebate back the second 25 mills because they use that then for maintenance at the Twin Peaks area. So we are rebating back 2 different components of that property tax TIF. And then the sales tax, so the sales tax TIF. So the actual TIF cycle for the sales tax starts November through October. And the base amount was the amount of sales tax that was derived from the prior year. So the base amount that was being generated at the mall at the time before it was demolished and rebuilt was just under $800,000. So that's our base. So we have to every year we reach that base, and then anything above that is what is considered the TIF. But it's anything above that on only 1% of the non-earmarked sales tax. So this doesn't include the sales tax that goes to the street fund, the open space fund, or the Public Improvement Fund. It's only the general, non-earmarked 2%. And at this point, it's only 1% of that 2% that was needed to fill that gap to make the debt service payments.
So do you assess that yearly based on how much the property tax TIF covers?
So the sales tax is completely independent of the property tax. So yeah, two different TIFs. Okay, and so my last slide for you, I just kind of wanted to give you a sense of what does the LURA budget look like. And so revenues, as I mentioned, comes from the property tax TIF, the sales tax TIF, and then there's some interest and unrealized gain or loss on the investments that is also part of the revenue stream. Our expenses then are from LURA, that TIF revenue that's generated gets transferred to the general fund, which then gets transferred to UMB to pay the debt on those certificates of participation. And then the only other two expenses in LURA, as I mentioned, are the refunds back to St. Vrain Valley School District and the Twin Peaks Metro District. And of course, the budget today is only for the Village of the Peaks, does not include any of the projects that you all are currently working on.
For the southeast urban, right?
It will be most likely structured very similar to this. So Harold, I don't know if you want to jump in. I know you were part of that whole negotiation for the mall. If there's anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I just think when we looked at what we were collecting in sales taxes, the mall was dying versus what we're actually collecting now. We're collecting a lot more money than we did prior to the redevelopment of this. The numbers were getting really low. And so that was really the big piece. And I think when we watch property tax covers the majority of the debt. The other thing I wanted to say is the Metro District piece is that is the owner willing to tax themselves an additional amount in order to pay their debt. So it's not like all of this is government funds. They placed an additional mill levy on themselves because it was cheaper to finance. And then part of the reason we issued the debt the way that we did, looking at the COPs, and COPs are different today than they were then. For example, today a COP, you can actually use the product itself as collateral versus needing to use other buildings. But the reason we did it is the interest rate was a lot better if we would have done it at the city level versus urban renewal. Saved us a lot of money by financing it this way. And actually, the projects that we're looking at coming forward are probably going to show themselves to be more advantageous from an interest rate perspective for the city to issue the debt versus the urban renewal authority.
And I mean, right now, we're thinking that it will probably be 3 unique debt issuances, 2 on the parking garage transit facility side, 1 on the Front Range side. And the reason for 2 on the parking garage side is because the partnership with Tebow to build that residential wrap, they will want to have parking spaces in the garage. So that can't be public. That's private, since it will be funded by them. So that would have to be a taxable debt, whereas the public side would be a non-taxable debt. So 2 issuances on that side and 1 for Front Range.
Excellent. That sounds like a good thing to dig into in a future meeting as well. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Teresa. Appreciate the baseline update for kind of where we are.
You bet.
And look forward to getting into spreadsheets in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, certainly let me know what it is you all are interested in, on a go-forward basis.
Yep, super helpful foundation. Thank you. That moves us on to our final agenda item, comments from commissioners. Any announcements or other comments from the commission? Hearing a resounding chorus of none, we'll move on to our actual agenda, final item, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner McCoy, second from Commissioner Christ. Did I say that loud enough? All in favor? All opposed? Hearing none. Thank you very much. I believe we ended right on time.
Right on time.